a lot of us experience sort of internal barriers when it comes to moving into the uncertain space of startups. But the rewards for doing so, yes, there's a sense of accomplishment, but there's also this sense of autonomy. I worked in international tax for a very long time, and it wasn't until later in my career, as part of some personal development work that I was doing with the firm I was at, I did a bit of psych profiling, only to find out that I was almost completely unlike all of my peers, whereas I was much more interested in, what was possible. I spent a good deal of my time seconded actually out to clients looking at sort of business transformation stuff and, how could we do things differently within the business? If you are in a situation where I hope everyone will be like myself, where you're actually working with people that you absolutely know and love and trust, and have a deep personal connection with, that is kind of anchored in friendship, but also, belief in what you're doing and each other. One learning I had very early was just making sure that there was alignment around the level of commitment to progressing. We're facing an acute mental health challenge in Australia and everywhere around the world. I think, the latest stats are 40% of Australian young people, that's 12 to 25, have or will experience mental health challenges. So provide sort of top care one-on-one to every individual that needs it. There simply isn't the resources available to do that through conventional care. They do some really interesting stuff also in, for example, the use of AI to support different types of therapy. It is the best the world has to offer in terms of digital mental health service research and evidence.
Just before we get started, if you're enjoying the podcast, can you please hit subscribe or follow? This helps me tremendously to grow my channel.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yep, it's a pleasure. It's great to have you on. So I guess let's just get right into it. Let's get the audience, give the audience a bit of an overview about yourself, what you do, and how you got into the startup space, and it's your journey, I guess.
Sure. So I feel like I'm not your typical startup. So my journey, at least professionally, started about 25 years ago in consulting. Interestingly enough, I suppose, in tax consulting, which led me to an interest in sort of supply chain reformation and ultimately in international trade and a whole bunch of regulation around supply chain. So long heritage in consulting, work for fee, that sort of thing. But it was through the trade stuff that I sort of developed a bit of an awakening, I suppose, when it came to the use of data. Kind of call it sort of 5 or 6 years ago, just when sort of the data and analytics started becoming mainstream. And the firm I was working for sort of got really focused on that as well. We started looking at, how can we use data to improve sort of trade arrangements and trade regulation? I could talk a bit more about that, but that certainly sent me on a different kind of a journey.
You said you started pretty much 25 years ago. So tell us more about the backstory. So how did you get into all of this, into this sort of work and being an entrepreneur? Do you think it's something, I always ask this question, do you think you just made like that, or something that happened in your life that sort of pushed you towards that? Or
I suppose in hindsight, I think I did have a certain bent, certainly for the innovation side. I worked in international tax for a very long time, and it wasn't until later in my career, as part of some personal development work that I was doing with the firm I was at, I did a bit of psych profiling, only to find out that I was almost completely unlike all of my peers in the tax space, who tend to be very much focused around legal interpretation and legislative analysis and regulatory focus, whereas I was much more interested in, what was possible. I spent a good deal of my time seconded actually out to clients looking at sort of business transformation stuff and, how could we do things differently within the business? So I suppose as a tax consultant, I was almost a frustrated sort of management consultant, as it were. I think it was an interesting environment, but it was ultimately the opportunity to work on some different things, particularly when we started looking at the trade technology and the supply chain technology piece. My role in that was not as a technology person. In fact, I imagine a lot of people who are familiar with tech are probably listening to me talking, thinking this guy's kind of he's not a technologist. Focus was always around the regulatory side and understanding the business problems that come from all of those different regulatory frictions you put into supply chains when you're trying to move goods in and out of the country or within sort of the landside supply chain. So I understood what the problems were. It was then partnering with different people, particularly, some people that were very good on the sort of the infrastructure architecture and the data analytics and the like, that could then sort of say, well, I could identify the problem and I could identify sort of what ideally might help solve it. But then there was all these other people that I was working closely with that helped actually build that solution.
And with
sorry, Paul.
Oh, go on. Yeah.
I was just going to say that the challenging thing around that is so having the right people around was really important. What ultimately sort of, I think, brought it undone a bit for us at the time was while there was within the program itself, there was a lot of appetite. Working in a larger organisation ultimately proved a bit challenging for that sort of entrepreneurial innovation.
Yeah.
I think we were working pretty quite closely with people who, I think they kind of looked at this from the perspective of, well, why do we need to invest in this to make it work when we can simply charge fees to make it work? And because that's, in fairness, that was the bread and butter of the organisation. They were a consulting firm.
Yep.
They weren't as focused on these sorts of ventures as perhaps me and a few of my partners wanted to be. So, that was a key learning. That kind of incongruence of sort of goals and sort of ultimate purpose kind of led to a real challenge and a bit of hubris, to be honest. I think we were pretty bullish about what could be done. I think some of my more senior colleagues that were kind of making ultimately the decisions to invest in this or not were a bit more confident than they should have been around, how well this could proceed without us. And there were some interesting conversations with our partners around that. So ultimately, it didn't progress in the way that we had wanted it to, but there was a heap of good learning, which my partners and I are leveraging now.
So that led to you going out yourself, that frustration?
Yes, so I left the consulting firm. I was a partner there. So I think the technical term is I retired, which is a bit of a misnomer because certainly haven't retired. But left the firm and have been working with, in particular, a couple of the people that I worked with on the TCS and some other sort of programs, working to take the same sorts of design principles that we developed earlier around adaptability and scalability, low cost and ease of integration, trusted, secure data exchange, those sort of core principles, and transparency and traceability, and apply those now into the ESG space.
Yeah, it's a familiar story, and I've had quite a few guests from, we won't mention the firm, but originally from that firm that have been a bit frustrated or not been able to do what they want, and have gone out and done their own thing and done really well. So very familiar stories. I know what's going on in there, but something definitely going on.
Well, they've had a bit of trouble, so I think there's a bit of cultural reformation going there. They've lost a lot of good people, but in the meantime, look, it's a bit like maybe some of the other people that you've been speaking to. It's been a great move for us. It's a very different environment. I see startups in my mind, as I imagine a number of your listeners do, as kind of young people in hoodies.
Not really.
I do possess a hoodie, but I'm not young. I'm out in the burbs, but I think the experience that came from working in consulting for so long has been really beneficial. And working, the partnerships I'm in now were formed through that firm. But equally, I think one of the major lessons for us is we don't have an idea that we're trying to prove. We've got a bit of experience around, we know to focus on particular problems. We know how to build solutions to those particular problems. And I think there's an element there of just a bit of credibility that comes from a bit more experience. Certainly when we're engaging with funders and other potential sort of customers and partners, that experience and that focus around, what is this solution solving, as opposed to what does this tech do, has, at least in my experience, been pretty helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting how you say, networks and prior experience. It really is important. And look, it's not, startup founders aren't young guys with hoodies. I mean, some of them may well be, but there's a huge range out there.
Yeah.
And in fact, the most successful ones are the more mature. And because of that, usually the same thing, they've built up those networks and credibility and the prior experience that they have as well. So if you're maybe like an 18-year-old, maybe you should just go and get a normal job in the area that, you want to do something in, get that experience, and then go off from there and do something in that space, build up connection, build up experience. Not in every case, but it does make a big difference. It is all about networks at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, it is interesting. Like I said, after sort of 25 years of pretty sort of focused consulting, and that was what I know, moving into doing my own thing, as liberating as it's been, it still I wouldn't say we just walk straight in and everything's worked.
Yeah.
It's very much a different world. I was used to a fair amount of sort of support sitting behind me, and so I just had to focus on I had a narrow beam right in front of me, whereas now there's a whole bunch of new sorts of compliance that I'm engaging with, and company setups, and dealing with you're the chief cook and bottle washer in startup land, which is really exciting. But equally, it's a bit of a stretch, and doing a lot of new things for the first time. And it does take a bit of time to build up, move through. We're in the tech space, and while we've already done a fair bit of, proving of concept, there's still prototyping and piloting and those sorts of things before you get into a space where there's, a steady income stream starting to flow from it, which is
not easy, even with the networks and everything else. And like you said, you have to be, jack of all trades, so to speak. You have to do everything until you really get going, and then you have certain, staff that come on board, or partners that are good at one thing and you're good at something else. Look, this podcast is, we talk about failures a lot, because we all fail and we learn from that. So you probably had a bit of a rocky road in some ways. So can you tell us about like a blockage or a problem that you came across, or a failure that you had, and what you learned from that?
Yeah. So it was early on, sort of post my PwC career, and dropped the name. And this is sort of lesson, you learn right from the get-go in terms of just alignment of goals and congruence and what have you. But was working with a particular group of people, and there was no issue really. There was just, I think we were all, in this case, it was sort of starting up less around a technology piece and more around a consulting piece. And we just weren't on the same page around what we wanted, or we had different levels of focus. I've certainly learned that in the last couple of years working in this sort of startup space, is you've got a lot of people and they're often doing a lot of different things. And we can talk about even the mental health space shortly, and some of the things that we're looking at startup land now. But a lot of people have other jobs or other projects or initiatives that they're working on, and if you're not all really well aligned in terms of, well, this is the thing we're focusing on, this is a priority, what's important to you might be the second or third or fourth order focus for somebody else. It's very difficult to get momentum going. It feels like you kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and you just don't have the time to waste. So, the one learning I had very early was just making sure that there was alignment around the level of commitment to progressing. Like, what are we moving forward with, and are we all kind of genuinely committed to doing this?
How many partners did you have?
It just kind of doesn't go anywhere.
How many partners did you have?
In that particular instance, it was 4 of them.
Well, okay.
And 2 of us were pretty keen, but other 2, I think, we're looking at this might supplement other things that they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we weren't looking for, just a nice little side hustle. We actually wanted to turn it into something more important. But
and so what were your learnings from that, and what would you do differently if you did it again?
I'd certainly make sure that there were, I think, some frank discussion up front around, well, this is exactly what we want to do, and what level of priority and particularly time commitment. It was the people that were. I'm not suggesting for a moment that that the people who weren't as committed were in any way in the wrong. We just didn't have the conversation, and so that they had other priorities, and we didn't want it. 2 of us didn't want it to be a side hustle. 2 did, and would definitely have had a clearer conversation around, this is what it looks like, this is the time commitment, and a bit of, this is what the business plan looks like, and we should be, these are some milestones. So we also have a mechanism to sort of gauge, well, are we actually progressing as well as we want, and checking in around that.
It's important. It's important to have that conversation at the beginning, and I guess really suss out your co-founders. I'm guessing they're co-founders in this case.
Yeah.
Because it's like a marriage, and married to 3 other people is even harder than mine.
So I don't understand how polygamy works. It's just
that's why it didn't work, you see. You really got to know them well, I guess, and make sure it's a good fit. And like you said, so it can be all different reasons as well why you do or don't fit, but them sort of being half committed because that's what they want, like a side hustle, and I guess if you have that conversation up front, then
if I invert that experience into what I'm doing now with the ESG work that I'm dealing with, there was a very clear discussion. It sort of started off as something that we were interested in, but then very clearly all aligned around, no, this has definitely got legs. We should progress it. We spent a couple of reasonable chunks of time together, actually planning things out, talking about what it'll be, what it won't, almost developing an early product pipeline so that we knew what we were heading towards. But there was also a very clear, it was openly discussed, but there was also a real clarity that there was, how do I put this, a complementarity. We had the skills between us. We had the skills that we needed, but there was an awful lot of sort of mutually reinforcing. We had somebody who was strong on data, and someone who was strong on sort of the development side, and myself who understood the sort of the regulatory environment and some experience in complex project management. Getting sort of that right blend of different skills, but some real alignment around, what we were going to do, and a commitment around moving it forward, and making the time for it was, is to date at least seeing a different outcome.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's what we learned. That's what we learned from our failures and mistakes, and that's the most important thing, to learn from that. So now you're doing it in a more efficient way. So that's great. Now, apart from these companies, you're also involved in a few other organisations. One is Panda, which is like perinatal support, and
Yeah.
also Oxygen, spelled with a Y, which is helping youths in with mental health issues, as I understand it.
Yeah,
Can you
that's
tell us
right.
a bit more about those and your involvement in them?
Sure. So, I mean, in parallel to the professional story, there was the personal story, and associated with the birth of our first child, we had a slew of sort of mental health challenges. My wife developed what could best be described as extreme, very acute sort of postnatal depression, and that with a new young family, there was a lot that needed to be dealt with there, and that sort of ultimately, sort of the ripples of that had impacts on me and what have you. So understanding kind of through my own lived experience the impact that sort of perinatal depression and anxiety has on a family is significant, but also through other parts of my I'm a father of three now, including sort of a young adult and a couple of teenagers. So have plenty of exposure to the challenges that young people have faced, particularly sort of over the last sort of 5 or so years. The pandemic is one aspect of it, but the prescience of a bunch of significant new global trends, increased global conflict, climate change, etc. It's pretty tough to be a kid.
It's tough enough, at any stage, really. Like being a teenager is tough with
and
everyone.
we're facing an acute mental health challenge in Australia and everywhere around the world. I think the latest stats are 40% of Australian young people, that's 12 to 25, are or will experience mental health challenges. So there wasn't an enormous lot that a tax consultant could do to help. But I did have an opportunity, fortunate actually, Paul, I've had a couple of opportunities to sort of get involved with a couple of organisations that do try to sort of lean into these challenges and lend maybe some of my professional experience through the board of those organisations to help out where I can. So one of them is Perinatal Anxiety and Depression Australia. They're in a way, they're kind of startup. They're a decent sized sort of workforce, but a fairly modest budget. And they operate sort of hard and fast and have a tremendous impact on the community. The other is Origin Youth Mental Health, and they're probably one of the world's leading youth mental health research organisations. So they're an MRI. They do a lot of knowledge translation and integration, as well as clinical services. So a real end-to-end from research to clinical service delivery organisation. And I've been on the board there for a few years now. The really exciting aspect for me about Origin in particular is the digital space. So they have, through grants, undertaken the research to develop a bunch of digital tools. Some are, for example, online therapy support. They call it MOST, so moderated online social therapy. There's online networking. There's a whole bunch of digital tools, and then there's an interface for therapists as well as an interface for the young person as well. And that currently is funded as a service across a number of state departments of health, but they do some really interesting stuff also in, for example, the use of AI to support different types of therapy. They've just launched an app that provides tools to help young people dealing with rumination, etc. I think the really impactful thing here is that, having just sort of talked about the scale and the growth of the problem, it's far outstripping the availability of conventional resources. So you're going to provide equitable access, and by access I mean affordability and availability, to young people for mental health services, and quality evidence-based mental health services, then digitisation is the way. And working with Origin Digital now, there's a real focus around, well, how can we look at different maybe commercial models and what have you to drive a bit of funding to scale those activities even further and improve both the quality but also the reach of those digital tools into the hands of young people in Australia and maybe elsewhere as well.
Yeah, no, it's a really good cause. And I know in a lot of those areas, or also, let's say, in the people that are, alcoholics or drugs, when they need help, they need to get that help. Availability is really, really low. They might have to wait 3 months just to go into a detox, and then wait another 2 months to go into a rehab or more. But, they can't really wait a day. Not really. Anything that brings in more availability and affordability, I think, is really worthwhile. Could you give us an example, maybe, of a young person that's gone through Origin that might have come in, in a really bad way, and then how that's maybe transformed them? Is there stories like that?
There are many stories like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm loath to go into any particulars, actually, Paul. But
no, not names or anything, but just
No, look, I think if we looked at it, unfortunately, I think this is a pretty typical journey. But understanding that mental health kind of exists on a spectrum, and there are people who have need for support, but maybe managing differently to others. There's also people who are, in dire need of acute care that can't access it. I think there's regrettably plenty of examples of people who simply can't access, for example, hospital beds, or ideally, not a hospital bed, but a proper, or should I say, more fit for purpose, access to a fit for purpose facility, that simply aren't able to get one. And for a long time in Australia, regrettably, it's, the head of Origin, Professor Pat McGorry, will talk about the missing middle. There's a big piece in the middle in terms of care that's missing there, and you do tend to have people who just kind of presenting with particular challenges, eating disorders, schizophrenia, acute depression, bipolar disorders. The prevalence of these issues in our young people is significant, Paul. But when you present, you sort of start at the beginning. And then hope that you can find your way into the part of the care, assuming there is availability and you've sort of gone through all of the steps along the way. I think that the value of most is that it provides access, and it's through referral at the moment. Headspace centres, for example, do a lot of referral to the moderation online social therapy, but it's something that young people access right out of the gate, so they can have access to it. There's tools, they can answer a few questions. You can start to sort of baseline these people in the system and provide them access to a community, provide support to psychologists or clinicians that are supporting them as well.
Yeah.
And they can plug into that system and continue to be. It's not instead of. It can augment other care as it continues with them as they go along. And there's a lot of stories around that, Paul, of people who have found something like most as an important backstop as they sort of migrate through the mental health care journey.
That support along the way is so important, isn't it? It's not just start the journey, get a bit of help, back off you go. They need that ongoing support.
It's important for the young person, but their families as well.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily difficult when you're trying to navigate the mental health system. There's reforms that are being sort of implemented, but in the interim, there's only to provide sort of top care one-on-one to every individual that needs it. There simply isn't the resources available to do that through conventional care. So providing interventions that support the journey along the way digitally going to be super important. And we're seeing that already. There's new platforms and apps and digital services that are starting to develop. I think the important thing that Origin are looking to do is knit that together with the world-class research and knowledge translation that they're doing, so that it's, it is the best the world has to offer in terms of digital mental health service research and evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Really great course, and it's going to help a lot of people. It already is, but the more it gets out there, and of course digitally, it can get out there to many, and even, as you said, even go beyond Australia as well.
Got to have a dream.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, if there was just one piece of advice you could give to an early stage startup founder, what would that be?
Trying very hard, Paul, not to resort to a cliche here.
Go for it.
Well, that would be my advice, actually, Paul. Go for it.
Okay.
I'm not somebody who lives with a lot of regrets.
Yeah.
I do wish I'd done what I'm doing now earlier, because there will be a lot of people that will tell you what can't be done. They will tell you a safer path. I think, just having a go is really important, and it's not overly intellectual. It's not a, particularly pithy piece of advice, but I wish somebody had said that to me. I think there's, a lot of us experience sort of internal barriers when it comes to moving into the uncertain space of startups. But the rewards for doing so, yes, there's a sense of accomplishment, but there's also this sense of autonomy. If you are in a situation where, I hope everyone will be like myself, where you're actually working with people that you absolutely know and love and trust, and have a deep personal connection with, that is kind of anchored in friendship, but also, belief in what you're doing and each other. That is, after 25 years of other professional experience, I feel qualified to say that that's not as common as people hope it would be.
I'm with you on that one. Same with my experience as well. And then we had a wonderful culture in our startup, but I came from a sort of, a bullying culture before that as an employee. So and unfortunately, that's in a lot of organisations now.
So that autonomy, by all means, sort of lean on friends and family, and it's amazing when you reach out into the community of other startups. People, there's a collaboration that occurs there, and people are willing to help. So it doesn't need to be as scary as others would have you believe it is, but go and have a go, because the autonomy that it has created, and the true alignment to a sense of, I actually really believe in what I'm doing. And I'm not just as a consultant, you're kind of a gun for hire. That sort of purpose-led piece has had a profound impact on me personally, both in terms of my mental health, my sense of self, I ran into an old colleague a couple of weeks ago who didn't recognise me. Just said, "Geez, you look well." I was like, "Yeah, I've been out of here for a little while." But my family and friends have noticed it as well, that autonomy and sense of purpose when you're doing something you believe in, and you're doing it, for yourself and for a group of, of people that you believe in, is pretty good. So just do it.
Having that purpose, I mean, even in the research on mental health, it's one of the biggest factors. Don't go into a startup to make money. Go in because you believe in something and you have a purpose, like you said. And it's not going to be easy. And a lot of people fail, but you can get going again. And if you think, well, I can't really leave my job, we've got a family or whatever, a lot of people start part-time as well, start dabbling and see how that goes. So,
the side hustle that becomes the main hustle.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, I can't malign the consulting career endlessly because, I found the purpose there. It was the decision to act on it that was a leap of faith for me, at least. And I know a few colleagues who've done the same thing and had a similar sort of outcome. I think you maybe even have spoken to one or two of them, and I'm sure they say similar things. But found it there and chose to act on it. I'm glad we did.
It's the right way to go. But obviously not for everybody. Like, everyone's different. I think, as we were talking before, I think people sort of have an entrepreneurial, type of personality, bit more of a risk taker, like challenges, like change. And some people that, and, that's fine as well. But if you are that type and you're frustrated and you wish you were doing something else, probably, just go for it.
I agree.
Or as Nike says, just do it.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, now, just to finish off, what's a question that you wish people asked you, but that no one has ever asked you?
That's a great question. My professional career would have been, why are you still here? Waking me up a bit. That would have been a good one. Jeez. Question without warning, Paul.
Yeah.
Question that no one's ever asked me. I wish they had.
Something you wish people would know about you, but nobody does. When no one's ever asked you. And we're not talking serial killer or anything like that. Just keep that to yourself.
No. They'll never find the bodies. Question. The why are you still here is the one that kind of does leap to mind. I'm just trying to find a slightly more positive spin on that.
It just has to be positive.
But I suppose that if there were no constraints, what would you really want to do?
Yeah. So if there were no constraints, what would you really want to do?
It's not a setup. I think I'm actually doing it now. I was actually having this conversation with my wife last night. Because I've been sort of purely in startup land, even though we were kind of a startup within a large organisation for a number of years beforehand. I've been sort of out on my own now for about 18 or so months, and it has been difficult. There's been a couple of false starts. I learned very quickly that doing it all on my own wasn't going to work. If it might be for some, but I'm way too much of an extrovert to be able to just sit in a room on my own and work. I need people around me. But things are coming together to the point where I'm doing work with Origin and Panda, and I'm working in this ESG space, kind of finding a different application for the technology that we were working on before that we had so much belief in. Sort of forming another sort of a small consortium, just a consulting piece with another group of guys where we've had the hard conversation again there. And if you could, I've never sort of really understood the gig economy as somebody who was a full-timer plus for so long. This portfolio lifestyle seemed unattainable, but now that I'm there, it's fantastic. It certainly doesn't feel like working anymore. I'm doing a lot of different things with organisations and people I believe in, and it's kind of feels really good. So I think I certainly can't consider retirement is an idea that scares the hell out of me. I have no desire to maybe ever do that. I'd like to continue to do something that has some sort of purpose. And at the moment, I can kind of feel like I'm able to just kind of do all of the different things that I want to do at once, which is pretty cool. Whereas I had no time for any of it before. So
living the dream.
Fingers crossed.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ben. It's great.
Pleasure. Good to speak to you, Paul. Great to speak to you, Paul.
Yeah, no, it was great to speak with you too. And I'm sure startup founders will find this really valuable as well from your perspective and your story. Everyone's different and everyone can relate to something different. So yeah, once again, thanks so much, Ben. And yeah, maybe we'll chat again in the future. I'll have you on again.
That'd be great. Progress will be made. Thanks, Paul.
Well, thank you.